Ann, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it. I know you're really busy, so it meant a lot to me to have you on the show. Can you maybe tell the audience a little bit about yourself so we have a little context about this conversation today?
Sure, I can, and thank you for having me. Going way back, I was born and raised in New York City, and early in my career in college, actually, I got involved in the environmental field. My mother had been a conservationist, saved a green belt on Staten Island in New York, and I followed in her footsteps in the present day at that time. I majored in environmental studies before it really got started. My degree says interdisciplinary studies. But the great thing about it was that I was able to create my own degree and take the courses that I wanted to. And after college, I went on to graduate school and then went and worked at the Environmental Protection Agency in DC at a very exciting time and spent 21 years in the environmental field. And in 1996, as a surprise, I switched over to coaching and changed my career 180 degrees. So business-wise, that's where I am. I founded Moving Forward Coaching and Consulting in 1996, and now it's Ann Vanino Coaching and Consulting.
Wow, well, that was you definitely have a lot of breadth of experience there. Can you maybe share with us a little bit about like your journey? Like you said, you went from New York City to Washington D.C. to Los Angeles to Mojave Desert, and now Tucson. I mean, can you talk about how like your life path has been shaped or changed as you kept on shifting in different locations? Was that a big deal, like moving to these different cities?
It was a big deal. There's been a lot of change in my life, and the theme has been being open to change and being able to handle it so that my life can be an interesting one. The first choice in terms of moving to Washington, D.C., I had gone to graduate school in Manhattan, and I was very interested in working for the city of New York. But in 1976, when I graduated, New York City went bankrupt. And people, yeah, there was a famous headline then that said, President Ford to the city dropped dead. They weren't going to bail him out. So the advice that was given to me was, don't look in New York, because if you are hired, you'll be the first one to go if they start having to do layoffs. So I went down to Washington, D.C. and worked for the Environmental Protection Agency. And then the next thing that happened that made me move was that there was a major change in administrations from Jimmy Carter to Ronald Reagan, and EPA changed their perspective quite a bit. And I stayed for a year, and then I decided that the EPA that I knew was no longer, and I would go somewhere else. And I went up to the New York City's Department of Environmental Protection. And that was familiar because I had lived in New York and I love New York, and that's where I wanted to work. So I went up there to start a small office with the department to assess their offices, because one of the things that was going on then was that EPA was coming down hard on them because New York City would say, well, we don't have to follow that regulation exactly because we're big, we're different than everyone else. And the commissioner knew that they kind of had to start falling in line. And I was fortunate. I was asked to get involved in a team after I ran that office for a couple of years that was looking at the possibility of a major drought in New York City. That's not something that you think about. So I did that. And then the commissioner said to me, what would you like to work on? And I said, I'm very interested in environmental protection and toxic chemicals. So I soon was leading a division of hazardous materials programs, which involved a hazardous materials emergency response team of chemists and chemical engineers. We responded to over 600 emergencies a year, a policy office, and a laboratory. And then I moved out to California. And part of that reason was I had gotten married. My husband had moved from Washington up to New York, but he had gone to college in California and he really loved it. And to be honest, it was a bit of a burnout time for me being in that emergency response work. And I thought I may want to have a family and I wanted a bit more balance in my life. So I moved out to California, worked in the environmental field, and then began my coaching. And I was living in Los Angeles in the city. It was not like New York City, there was definitely nature around. But then we decided to move out to the high Mojave Desert. We were looking to have a little more space and be closer to nature. And I had no idea what we were really doing. We thought we knew, but we really moved into some isolation, some very positive closeness to nature, and a different world in terms of my business and how we live. And then in 2022, my husband passed away, and it was really a monumental loss. But I was staying in a rural area. We had lived in the mountains, and there was a real learning curve for me taking care of the house, living on my own. But then some things happened involving wildfires and increases of insurance. And so I decided to move. And I had good friends in Tucson. And really, mainly intuitively, I just came here to Tucson and I love it. It's a little more urban, but there's a national park a half hour away and I'm surrounded by nature. So I'm pretty happy now. And I think after having lived a few years, that I'm really glad that my life changed in the ways that it did, because it's a variety of experiences. You don't have fear about change. And as you age and get older and things change, that fear can really come in. So I really feel at peace with my life right now, although I have had my jolts.
That's really amazing. You had all these interesting experiences. I'm curious to know, like, what inspired you to go from like working with the environment to coaching? What brought about that change?
It was really happenstance. I had my own business. I was doing environmental consulting with a partner, and she thought that she might retire early. And she said, if I retire early, would you want to take over the business? And by that time, I really thrived on change. And we had had the business for 6 years. So I decided, no, maybe I'll do something else, because the business was really she and I, and it was a combination of both of us. And I went to a personal growth workshop, and I was waiting for a payphone, which really doesn't happen that much anymore. And I sat next to a woman who was studying to be a coach. And I said, what's a coach? And she told me, it's someone who supports people in building a fulfilling life. And my first thought was, well, I do that already, but it's not a job. I was working a lot with small business owners just on my own. They would come to me and I would help as I could. So I pursued coaching, and it turned out my business partner decided not to retire, but by that time I was too much into the coaching. I took some introductory courses at the Coaches Training Institute, and they were fantastic. So that's what made the change.
So, like, how do you help somebody who feels stuck in life and maybe afraid of change because like, you keep emphasizing that topic of change? I mean, like, what are your first steps when you start working with a client?
When I start working with a client who is stuck, I get to know them and I look carefully at where they're at. How are their emotions? How are they thinking about life? Sometimes when people are stuck, they can be fairly negative about life. So that's what I'll look at first. Let's look at the positives in your life right now and what are your dreams. And then what I'll do is, if they're interested in coaching, I'll always spend time with people before they decide to coach, because it's very important that coach and client have a connection. But if they have decided to coach, the first thing I'll do is work with them to determine their values. And values in coaching, I don't give them a list that says, oh, okay, check off what your values are: honesty, adventure, whatever it might be. What I do is I ask them a series of questions that tries to get to the essence of who they are, what really makes them tick. And that helps you not be guided by the tyranny of the shoulds, which is what we call it. that I have to have a job, I have to pay the mortgage, so I'm not going to think about what I really want. And once we've determined their values, they prioritize them from 1 to 10. And that's tough because if you have values, you want to honor all of them, but sometimes you can't. And throughout our coaching, what we'll do is we'll go back to values. If someone has come to me because they want to find a different job and they get an interview and the job might pay a lot of money, but it doesn't have some of the things that they need, if they do a values review and say, if I take this job, am I honoring my values? Then they'll have a better idea of what choice they really want to make. It's very important. And that concept of the tyranny of the shoulds is really an important one, because if you want to be happy and fulfilled in life, you want to be true to who you are. It's not that you won't make compromises or that you can honor every value fully, but that's a real starting point. And then we look at their commitment. In the beginning, when I started coaching, I didn't look at whether someone was committed to the coaching or not, but it became very clear to me that that commitment was needed. So the way I define commitment is a commitment to themselves, to the process of coaching, not a direct commitment to me, because coaching can bring out fears. And I did have some people who the fear became very great, and it was, I'm not so sure I want to change. So we would look at that. We would look at, what are your fears about change, and can we overcome them? And then we look at their primary focus. What is it that they really want to do in their life? That's very important for me, because my job is to hold their agenda. I have to get to know them, what they really want to do. And then we go through concepts in coaching, things like gremlins. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Those are the things that sabotage us, that keep us from a fulfilling life. For me, it was a need for approval, kind of being a people pleaser. And that was keeping me from going where I wanted to go, because I wanted to please people. For other people, there might be a critical voice inside, or there may be a voice from their past that says they're not worth it. And another concept is the concept of doing and being, that in the coaching, it's not just about goals and deadlines, it's about how you feel about things. Because sometimes if someone hasn't done something that they intended to do for 3 or 4 weeks, you say, let's look at why you're not doing it. And they find out that they may not really want to. And then we set our goals for the coaching. Most of my clients work informally. We don't do an action plan that says, I'll have this done by this date. We set an overall goal, and every week they set intentions. And what I do is I make sure that I'm keeping an eye on their goals, particularly if there's a time frame to our coaching. And then we get started and we do weekly calls, but I make sure I'm available. Say if someone has an interview or some kind of crisis comes up, they can always get in touch with me.
I mean, now you've been in the coaching industry for a very long time. How has it evolved over the years?
Yeah, I started when there were only 1,000 coaches in the country. And we started a Los Angeles branch of the International Coach Federation. And I was on the board of directors, so it was great. I really had a real window on how the profession got started in LA. And it was the Coaches Training Institute, where they were in Northern California, where I trained, was really interesting. They said most of the people who had started the school had been somehow involved in the entertainment industry. And they looked at actors and actresses and they said, actors and actresses have coaches for their acting skill, but they don't have coaches for their lives. And it's a really tough profession. So that's how they evolved. And then what I see now is that obviously coaching has really grown and there's a whole variety of niches, but it was a wonderful time to be there. All of us were just starting out. Some of us were saying, wow, wait a minute, I'm going right into a new profession without getting a master's degree or a bachelor's degree or taking very extensive training. But most of the people, particularly in those early days, that were attracted to coaching had natural skills. And with the training that we got, we were able to create a practice that really worked. And then you learned by doing. In the first 2 years of coaching, when I would market, the main thing I had to do was explain that I didn't coach a sports team and what a coach was so people could get used to the concept. But now it's a whole different thing.
Wow. So like, and how do you apply like the skills? So you said a lot about like changing locations. If somebody wanted to go to a different location, but they're not sure, or what if their spouse wants to go to a location and they're not sure if they want to go along with the spouse? That can be like a potential conflict. Like, how do you deal with things like that? If you have like a potential client saying that my husband or my wife wants to move, to X, Y, Z, well, I'm not sure, I'm really on board with that. Like, how do you handle that type of issue?
Yeah, it's really about conversation. That's a really good question. It's not something I've really thought a whole lot about. I've just done naturally. If someone comes and says, I really love my job, for example, and now my husband is getting transferred and he's pretty insistent on leaving, and I'm going to have to make my career secondary, or I'm not sure how I'm going to work because in some situations they can't work remotely. What we do is we talk. We go back to their values, we look at the lifestyle change and what it will be, and then we just go through the pros and cons. I also have a tool that I was taught by the Coaches Training Institute called Yes No. And what you do is you say, if I am going to move, what do I say yes to and what do I say no to? Okay, maybe I'll move, but I want these things to be in place. And really, what you're getting at is getting to the client's truth, their actual truth. What do they want? And we will talk about compromise and get to a point where they have some clarity about their decision, because you don't want anger or resentment to build up in them. You want them to really look straight at what's going on. And sometimes they may say, no, I really can't do it. And we'll coach about speaking with their spouse or whatever needs to be done and how important it is to them. In some of my work, I was introduced to the concept of sacrifice versus surrender. And in this case, surrender is a vulnerability, but it's a positive thing, where you might be in a circumstance, not necessarily that job one, but you might be in a circumstance, say you lost your job or whatever, you surrender to the reality of the present moment. And from there, you can decide what you want to do. Sacrifice is when, let's say, you don't say anything to your spouse and you move and you're miserable. Then you're sacrificing yourself. So surrender is preferable to sacrifice. But it really is about my listening and about helping the client get to the point of their truth about something. And most of the time, it really works out because there's a level of acceptance by the time they make their choice. They say, oh, all right, I've looked at all the aspects of this and I realize that the best decision is either to go or not go.
Now, I mean, you mentioned about, you lost your husband some time ago. How did that impact like your life, like in terms of like change? Like how did that, like I think you mentioned you moved to a different location after Pat. Like how did that whole like thing impact you like emotionally and everything? Was that, I mean, dealing with all that grief?
Yeah, it was and is still is a monumental loss. It's almost 3 years out now, so I've adjusted. There's another point about change. When you make a change after a loss like that, it can be very difficult, but it's a whole new chapter. So there are positives about it. He had been sick for 4 years, but it was only the last 6 months that I was really caregiving. Before that, we were back and forth to treatments and hospitals and things like that. But it was the last 6 months that were really tough. And when he passed, you're never prepared for it, but it had been 4 years and he was in hospice at home. But I remember standing in my dining room and I was just looking out the window and I said, I said to myself, you have this huge mountain to climb. And because of all the change and because of my focus on the journey, I didn't anticipate it would be that way. I knew it would be very hard, but I could even see the mountain in front of me. And I just sighed and I said, well, you really have no choice. And about 3 weeks, I lived in the mountains in a beautiful area and dealt with wildfires for a long time. And about 3 weeks after, I had had somebody while my husband was sick helping in the yard. And he texted me around 10:30 at night on a Saturday night and said, it looks like the fire is right near you. And I was inside in my house, and it wasn't, thank God, but it looked from where he was that it was there. And all of a sudden I realized, oh my goodness, here I am by myself, because neighbors are not, they're friendly, but it's not a real community in the sense of seeing people every day and things like that. A lot of people live in rural areas because they want to be on their own. So the big adjustment was taking care of the house, being by myself. I'll admit, probably for the first couple of months, I didn't want to get home after dark. I wasn't afraid, but it was just too much of a downer to walk into a dark house and have to put the lights on. We had been married 38 years. We knew each other for 44 years. So it was a huge change. But I got stronger. I had two friends. They didn't live near me, but they were two women that lived on their own that were very independent, and they were also very handy. They could fix things. Both of them were amazing that way. And so I decided, all right, I'm going to aspire to be like them. I was not mechanical at all. It was totally new to me. And I don't know if I'll ever be the way that those two women are, but I started having to deal with whatever happened there. The first time I saw a black widow spider without my husband, and I had a 3-foot rattlesnake show up on the deck, and I got closer to some of my neighbors. But it was huge. Or if I had to fix something, I couldn't call my husband. And luckily, they were good contractors for the big things. And then I had to think about, wow, I didn't consciously think about it. It's more looking back. What's my identity now? You know, I'm living out in a rural area. I'm at heart a city person, as much as I loved it there. And what is it all about? And the grief, I was fortunate to have some counseling and get in on a Zoom group and get some support. But I think, and I've heard other people say this, you don't get over the grief. What you do is you adjust to the way that life is and you try to create happiness. And I think that to a certain extent I've done that. I will miss them for all my life. However, I do want to go on living.
So can you maybe like share with us like how do you support clients that are going through like these big life transitions such as grief or unexpected changes?
The first thing that I do is create a space of motivation, support, and encouragement so that they know that when they come to the space of coaching, that they're fully supported. Another concept that I think is very important, and it's something that our society doesn't prepare us for, is the ability to get comfortable in the unknown. Society tries to protect us from the unknown. Do things the way we say, and everything will be okay. Just kind of follow the rule book. But the unknown, as we all know, comes in. Someone might lose a job or lose a relationship or lose a loved one. So we talk about the hero's journey and the unknown and how you can get comfortable. And the unknown presents as adventure as well as discomfort. When I became a coach, my presentation skills that were needed were very different from what I had in business. And I worked with a wonderful coach. He was an improvisational actor, and he called himself an escort to the edge. And he said in teaching public speaking that he brought people to the edge of their comfort zone because that is where change really happens, and people had to change their ideas and their fears about public speaking. So I don't necessarily bring people to the edge of their comfort zone. I let them bring themselves to that edge and encourage them. I tell them about my own life. I might talk about other people and say that happiness is possible at the edge of your comfort zone and not possible if you stay within the safety of society or whatever you deem that safety to be. There's a well known quote by the author Anais Nin, and she said, "And the day came when the risk to stay inside the bud was greater than the risk it took to bloom." But I'll be right there with them. And the other thing that I work with them on is being fully in the present moment. Because when they're fully in the present moment, it's not quite as bad as they might be anticipating that it'll be. You'll say, okay, let's stop. Let's look at what's gone on. You may have lost your job, but let's look at your finances. Let's look at your possibilities. And most of the time, people get encouraged by that. And then they know they have the coaching to help them move forward every week. And things start happening because they're putting their intention in it, and there's fear, but they're not living out of fear. Things start moving for them. And lots of times it leads to really good things that they didn't expect, because I do think that there's a space of the unknown that we have to go into before significant change happens.
And I'm just curious to know, since like you lived in a lot of different areas, do you ever give like guidance to people of like where they should live? It's like, oh, it's good to live in the Northwest right now, or move to California, don't move to California, or move to New York. Do you ever give that type of advice, or do you let the clients figure them out themselves?
That's really what I do. I certainly share ideas. I might tell them about Tucson or LA or New York, but we know their values already. So if they say, I really want to be in nature, I'll say, well, what lifestyle are you looking for? Do you want to be in nature? Do you want to be in a city? Even if they said nature, you ask that because things can change. So it's really kind of bringing it out of them and what they want to do. And one of the things in the Coaches Training Institute, when they trained us, they said, you are not a mentor. You don't know better than your clients. Your job is to get to know them and to hold their agenda. And boy, did I learn that in the beginning, where I thought someone might have been in crisis or really unhappy, and I thought I knew where they should go or could go. But instead of saying that, I did something that they taught us called asking powerful questions. And then it came out. And in several instances in the beginning of my coaching, they were going to a totally different place, and it really worked. And when we were training and being observed, if they saw us coaching and telling someone what to do, we got it right away. No, absolutely not. And I think that's a good one, because really what you're trying to do is help a person find their own happiness, not do what you think they should do.
So you mentioned like also like in your coaching about new directions. How do you help someone find like and their new path?
Yeah, you picked up on it. New directions is really about change. So it's a couple things. One thing is to have the courage to change, getting to the unknown, identifying their dreams. What are they dreaming of? They may not go exactly where they think, but to pull back their arrow and say, this is where I want to go. And then in the process, to encourage them and to say it's going to be okay. And often I'll say, okay, let's look. If you stay where you are, how is life going to look? If you change, even with the presence of the unknown, how is life going to look then? And the unknown really is ever present in our lives. And usually we get there and they say, okay, I'm going to do it. However, I'm not going to accept a job that is under a certain salary, because it's very important to me to be able to continue to pay my mortgage. And that's fine. And most of the time they can find something. And many times they start out on one path looking for something and they find something else that is just what they wanted.
And let me ask you that: some people think that they want to solve all the problems, issues on their own. I mean, what are the benefits of going to a coach versus trying to figure things out on their own?
Yeah, that's a good question. And people will say that I can do it on my own. And many people who do have that feeling, when they come to you, they've come to at least a partial realization that they can't do it on their own. It doesn't signify any weakness. It's more the idea of having a space to go to once a week and to put focus on what they want to achieve because life gets so busy. And the other thing that my clients tell me is that the stories about my own life and my insights are very helpful to them. And it's accountability. Sometimes people don't like that word, but it's accountability to themselves that they're going to move forward. And as we develop our relationship, I think it's quite comforting to them because they're not necessarily talking to their family about it. But if someone really feels I'm going to do this on my own, then that's fine. I'll spend time with them, we'll talk, but it doesn't help either of us. And I never say, no, I'm not going to coach, but I usually say, maybe you should go out on your own, but I'm here if you want to ever coach. Because if someone doesn't bring their commitment to the coaching, it's going to be hard to realize their own dreams within that context. And sometimes you see it where people don't show up or something goes wrong. In the beginning, not much now at all, but in the first couple of years, I had situations where people wouldn't show up for calls, either because of fear or they didn't want to go where they had committed to go, or it was just really too much. And that's understandable. But after a while, I'd say, do you really want to do this? If so, it's going to be really important that you show up. And one woman, she left the coaching after a couple of months, and I was disappointed. I was a new coach, and it was like, gosh, what did I do wrong? And it was really interesting because she wrote me a letter 3 years later, and she said, I just want to tell you that I did leave the coaching, but I really heard what you said. And she said, I don't think I was ready to do it then. And then she gave me a whole list of all the changes that she had made 3 years later. It had all happened. So there's something about timing, too.
That's amazing. That's a
Yeah,
testament that you've been helping people. That is wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I also want to ask you because I know that you've also studied at the Lynn Andrews Mystery School and you
yes.
studied secret arts under her. So that adds a spiritual, I guess, dimension or perspective to your coaching and your life. Can you maybe share with us how did Lynn Andrews' teachings, her spiritual teachings, impact you and the way you coach? How to make things different?
The work with Lynn really is the core of my life. It still is. I stopped working with her in 2010. We stayed in touch. But what she said that she did was that she taught us ancient feminine wisdom, although there were probably about 20% of men in the school and in her work of men in her work, ancient feminine wisdom that had been passed down orally for generations. And really what it was it was about balance and power and knowing yourself. She often talked about having one foot in the spiritual and one in the physical, and the balance between love and power. And as a woman, I had accomplished a lot in my life, but I still had that need for approval. It was still there, and there was this edge to everything that I did that I wasn't fully myself. And some of my success had been due to that need for approval, which is okay. I wanted to do my best. I wanted to please people, but it's not really a way to live your life. So I worked one-on-one with her, and I was very wary. At that time, they called her New Age, and I was very wary about working with her. But I had heard her speak, and something had really drawn me. It wasn't the content of the words as much as who she was. So I made an appointment to see her, and I had no intention of doing what I did, but I walked into her house where she did her appointments, and I said, I'm Catholic and I don't want a guru. And she was fine. She was fine with it. And she said, Ann, she said, sometimes it's like we're an iceberg floating on the ocean. And below us is this dark water. And and you want to know what's under the surface of the water, and sometimes it's nice to have a guide, and that really was great. And then the tools that she gave us and the knowledge of ourselves. And it took her quite a while for me to understand, not even understand, but even to acknowledge the issues that I had growing up that led to that need for approval. She was really masterful. It took her about 2 years of working with me before I started understanding what was really going on. And she was very loving, but she created a supportive space for me to go into the way that coaching does. But in certain ways, she was really brutal because she would ask me how I was handling certain things. She would tell me when she thought I was giving away my power. And I absolutely was. So, all in all, I worked with her 21 years. She had a 4 year mystery school, which was fabulous. Then I became a mentor in the school. And all through, I worked with her one on one. But she's passed away, but she's absolutely pivotal in my life. She passed away a couple months after my husband, which was another change I had to go.
Oh,
Yeah. But
that's
it was
huge.
a wonderful experience. And her school is still there and her work is being continued.
You talked about like women's empowerment, which is really important, and it's become more popular than ever for some time now. Can you maybe share with the audience, because I'm sure there are a lot of women listening to this, how can women feel empowered if they're like a stay-at-home mom and the husband is working and they're not, or they're not living in the place that they're dreaming of? Lisa, maybe they want to be in nature, but they're stuck in the city. How can they feel empowered when the current reality, in their mindset doesn't feel like they're empowered? If they're like stuck at home with the kids and they can't really work and stuff like that. Can you maybe share some wisdom? How can women feel empowered in those type of situations or anything similar to that?
Sure, I can share some ideas. It really goes right back to values again. And someone may say, I'm an at home mom. People aren't understanding that. And I'm made to feel less than. We'll go over your values. Is it very important for you to raise your children in a certain way and to be at home? My mother was very independent. And when she went to college, it was a very pioneering school. So some of her classmates were moving up very high in corporations, doing a whole lot of stuff. And she'd get the alumni magazine. And she would tell me as I got older that sometimes it made her feel badly, but that she had decided early on, because she had a tough childhood in certain ways, and not financially at all, but just with certain things that happened, that the thing that she really wanted in her life was to raise a stable family. So if I had been coaching her, that would have been one of her values. So if someone comes to me, I would talk to them about, what do you get from that? And what is your truth? And really, again, it gets down to being comfortable in what you're doing. If a person is comfortable that they're home and taking care of their children, if they can get to a point where they're not defensive about that because of what's around them, they'll show other people that they're satisfied. Some people may still judge them and be critical, but lots of times when it bothers people what other people think, it's because they're not sure within themselves, or there's a vulnerability. They might be sure within themselves that they want to raise their children at home, but they're not sure because of the uncertainty of what the society values. And what's really important is what you value.
Oh, that's really great advice. I also want to like kind of go back to like the climate and environment. I mean, you've also still working with clients on the environment, correct? Like you don't just do coaching, and you work with helping them with improving their green. I'm not sure what's what's the proper word, like
Green
climate change.
schoolyards. Green schoolyards. Yeah, that's the center right now. That was another surprise. Here I am. I lost my husband. I'm working as a coach, and a client that ran a nonprofit organization that I had done some coaching in knew about my environmental background prior to coaching, and she had a real need. And she asked me to represent her on a coalition that in Los Angeles that was involved in the greening of schoolyards. And that was a huge change. That was something, when you ask about all of the change and the jolts that it gives you, when she asked me to do that work, I was really excited. All of a sudden, there was something new, something I really enjoyed doing, and I wasn't giving up my coaching. So I started doing that work, and I absolutely love it. And it's brought me further into climate change. And now I'm looking at kind of a hybrid career right now, keeping the coaching. And I was figuring out how am I going to explain myself in the world. It would probably be separate. I'd be talking to someone about environmental consulting or about coaching. So I hired a firm that I had worked with before on my LinkedIn profile, and she started looking at what I was doing, and I couldn't figure out how she was going to mesh it together. And she said it was about creating change on both an individual and global level. And I love that. And I just redid my website, and the banner headline is Catalyzing Positive Change for People and the Planet. Now, really what that does is it just kind of ties it together. It's not that both of them are necessarily integrated, but 3 years out from my husband passing and moving and all the changes, I have a new direction now, and it's great.
Wow, that's really amazing. I mean, so it's kind of cool that you have like multiple passions. I mean, what advice do you give to somebody who may feel like not sure like what direction to go into because they have all these different interests, like you know what I mean, feel like they're all over the place? I mean, how can they? Do they need to hone it down into like one thing, like focus on one thing? Because some people say you have to pick one thing, or do you think it's or if somebody has a lot of interest, what advice can you give them if they're not sure like which one to pick, or can they combine them, or?
I think the most important thing is to ground first, just to ground yourself and say, I have all these ideas, but time and space is limited. So I know that I need to make a decision. I coached a woman who was incredibly talented artistically. She was involved in aromatherapy, makeup. She had been very successful in makeup. She worked with the Oscars and in Hollywood in some really high level things. But there were things she wanted to accomplish. She was creating herb gardens, organic herb gardens that would do herbs that you could use in spas or use in your face or your hair or whatever. And she came to me. She was dealing both with wanting to get a book out and also managing her business because she wasn't really oriented towards managing the business. So on the business side, we kind of pulled it down and said, you do have to keep your books. You do have to pay your taxes. So you don't necessarily have to get deeply into the numbers. You can get a bookkeeper to work with you, but you need to keep an eye on those numbers. And that worked really well. And then we started working on the book. She had all the content, but she would get distracted. And she was good at everything that she did. And I remember one time she got on the phone and she said, I've got this great idea. And the book was almost ready to go. And I didn't say anything. I was just really quiet. And she said to me, oh, it's the F word again. And that was because we emphasize focus so much. I always remembered that. Oh, it's the F word again. But she redirected, and that book got out, and it was great. So if someone has a variety of talents, or someone's can't make a decision, you just work with where they are. If someone has problem making choices, you do your best. And I try to be extremely patient and realize that it may take time because decision making is tough for some people. But we have their values, we have their focus, what they want to do, and we get there. And sometimes I can be firm, not telling someone what to do, but say, you've really wanted to do this for the last month. Why isn't it happening? And when they actually do it, they start moving. Even something small, it's the action. Lynn Andrews used to call it an act of power. She'd say, even if you want to go somewhere, even if it's unrelated, if you paint your bathroom or paint a door or go out and do something different, she goes, you begin a momentum that gets things going. She
So
gave me
let,
a, I'm
I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
a great analogy when I first started working with her. And she said, Ann, sometimes you've climbed a mountain and you're at the top of the mountain and you look up and all you see are clouds above you. And it's not clear where you can go. So you create an act of power, which might be, for me, it was starting a business on my own because I was working for a firm. You do an act of power and that blasts you through the clouds. And then all of a sudden you're in space and you have to build a new spacesuit in order to survive. And I love that. And it's really true. Once you can blast through those clouds with something small initially and eventually what you really want to do, you're in a whole nother environment and things start moving. It's the courage to blast through the clouds and the courage to not go only by the dictates of society and walk into the unknown.
So can I ask you, I mean, now that you had all this experiences for multiple decades, from like Earth Day activism to like, being in the desert, what life lesson stands out the most for you right now? Like if you look back at all those years, is there anything like particularly like one life lesson that if you want to, it comes to mind right now, you'd like to share with people?
It's repetitive, but it's really true. It's core that if you can find a way to get comfortable with the unknown, your life can be magical.
Oh, that's wonderful. I like that a lot.
Thank you.
So if someone was interested in working with you, have you as their coach, or they have questions about this interview, or they need help if they're a business that need help with their environmental climate change or mitigation, what are the best ways to get in touch with you?
I'll give you my phone number. That's always the most direct way to call or text me. In the United States, it's 661-92-8130. And if you want to find out about my environmental consulting and coaching, it's Ann, A-N-N, Vanino, VANINO.com. And my books and my openings blog are on AnnVaninoAuthor.com. And I'd love to talk to you, just to hear about you and share ideas. Because as I said earlier, there needs to be a synchronicity and a compatibility. So I'm very happy to spend time with people before they make a decision.
So what message, we only have a few minutes left, so what message do you most hope to leave to our listeners who are ready to step into like the next chapter, but don't know where to start?
I think the message would be that a happy and fulfilling life is absolutely possible and to go for it.
That's great. Was there anything else before we end the conversation? Was there anything else you'd like to mention?
I don't think so. My blog is called Openings, and Openings blog is about things that happen in your life that may be an opening to positive change. And you may find that useful. It's free. You can subscribe to it or check it out on my website, and you may find it something that helps you create the life you want to live.
Well, Ann, it was a real pleasure speaking with you today. I really appreciate it. We're really wonderful to speak to. I mean, you have so much experience and knowledge. I mean, it was like every minute I was being taken away by like some of the things that you were saying, and I'm sure a lot of people in the audience will get a lot out of this conversation too. So thank you so much for spending time with me and everybody else and sharing all your wisdom and experiences. I'm sure you're going to have a positive impact to people who listen to this podcast interview. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything with us today.
Thank you, Daniel, for having me. It's been a real treat.